When we get into the last 20 or 30 years leading up to 2020, we're getting into contemporary furniture, and this is where things break down. And the problem is this: as we have increased individuality, we start to lose large societal movements. We also run into the historical problem of not having enough time to really start to categorize what we're looking at in the last 20 or 30 years, because these are movements and ideas that are still developing. Now, add this to the internet, where an idea can move from Asia to the United States to Europe in a matter of seconds, and you start to get a sense of the difficulty here. Now, many of the pieces are going to be sustainable. That will stick with us, such as this wooden bench. But we also bring in ideas of ergonomics and ideas from the Memphis style and from postmodernism that furniture should be art. And so we get pieces like this chair. This would appear to be either wood or stone, carved into this very beautiful, rounded, curvilinear form with the green interior there to offset the exterior whites and beiges of the rest of the chair. Now, something like this, again, is basically art. We also see pieces like this. Here we have silver leaf onto a chair. It's another organic form. This is only possible through the use of a combination of CAD design, allowing for, cutting and everything to be done by computers, that being combined with some of the organic forms that we've seen developing, and the materials such as plastics, fiberglasses, and other newer materials that are developing from that post-World War I period. So we continue to see these developments, and it's not just chairs, it can be entire interior spaces. Sometimes we get a sense of minimalism. That's one of the large movements that we're seeing going on right now, where people want less stuff in a cleaner, more aesthetic form, especially amongst the upper middle class and upper classes. These are also pieces that are finding their way into museums frequently as museum pieces from the moment they're created. They're not being saved as antiques of a bygone era. Rather, they're being created as art pieces for museums, much like contemporary art today. Now, we have designers trying to do different things. For example, here, Mark Fish is trying to create, this is the mollusk table, and he's trying to bring that organic form into the interior space. We get some of that sense of playfulness from postmodernism, but also that idea of bringing the outside inside that we get from arts and crafts. And this is all being brought together in a very individual form. So it's very difficult to put something like this up against many of the minimalist pieces that we've seen, or many of the contemporary pieces, and find patterns that are going to hold with us. Again, individuality becoming so strong that movements simply break down. We tend to see, especially in the 90s and to the 2000s, this sense of irony, this sense of pop, something that is only going to speak to us today, such as these tables. We can identify that person or that thing. This is sort of half of Mickey Mouse, for example, holding up a coffee table. But imagine someone looking at this 200, 300 years from now, just like we look back at the neoclassical. Now, because the neoclassical is society as a whole looking at a specific idea, we can identify that. But you can imagine in 200 years, historians looking at this and going, I'm not really sure what's going on, or why it's Mickey Mouse, or why it's in this sort of very planar, almost, 32 or maybe 32-bit, 16-bit graphics form. Whereas today we understand that because we live within the society that created it. The forms can take a more minimalist approach. So here is a more minimalist sort of living room. This has become increasingly popular, really a reaction against the rampant consumerism that we've been fed for the last 50 to 70 years, really in that post-World War II period. We also see an increase in using natural materials, slab materials, and trying to keep them as natural as possible, such as a coffee table like this, where It's really sort of honoring the tree that it came from. It speaks to nature. It really speaks to almost that Shino form that we saw from Japan way back before the midterm. So a lot of different ideas coming in. And this is that concept that I got at earlier of the West importing ideas almost as much as we're exporting them at this point. This is a very Japanese idea. He even uses the Japanese wood keys here to hold the wood together, a very traditional technique. But yet it's being used in a Western setting. And of course, postmodernism is still there, that sense of humor that we want to have about many of these pieces. Here we have that living edge slab table, very, very popular these days, and they've run a zipper down the middle of it to combine it rather than some river of blue or teal resin, which is so common. So we're seeing a lot of different ideas. The problem is, because we don't have hindsight, it's difficult to start to categorize and say that the fashion was X, Y, or Z when the fashion is happening around us. So how do we deal with some of those issues? How do you start to deal with what interior design is today?